Welcome to Homestead Reptile, and today we're going to talk about gecko genetics for dummies. So let's talk about dominant traits. A dominant trait, in a nutshell, is just when an allele is produced by a dominant phenotype. The individual just needs to have one copy of this dominant phenotype to pass on to future offspring. So an example of this would be Dalmatians, and a human example would be brown hair, brown eyes, and another gecko example, tigers. So you only need one parent to pass on a dominant trait. But since dominant trait is what it is, it's dominant, it's not recessive, there's no hets, it doesn't like hide in the shadows. If the animal does not express a dominant trait, it doesn't have that in its genetics. So for example, like the Dalmatian. Say I took Boba Tea and I bred into a bunch of females, and all of their offspring except one had spots, and one baby had 0 spots. He has no Dalmatian in him. He is completely spotless. He doesn't carry that dominant trait for Dalmatian spots. And then we'll go to recessive. So recessive is pretty much the opposite of dominant. You need to have 2 of these alleles to express the full trait. So those individual creatures could have one copy each of a recessive trait. They come together and they can produce an animal that has the full expression of the trait. But you need 2 of the genes together to fully express it, to fully visually see it. An example of this in humans would be blonde hair, blue eyes, crested geckos, axanthics, and phantoms. You need 2 of these traits together to fully express the animal. So if you don't, you just have a normal looking animal that doesn't express that trait. Now, incomplete dominance. So incomplete dominance has a lot of similarities to, I personally think it has more similarities to recessive in a way, because again, you need 2 of these genes, 2 of these alleles together to fully express the animal. But unlike recessive, the normal babies don't look normal, and we have some examples with lily white. So a lily white does not look like a normal crested gecko, and it's just holding one copy of the gene. 2 copies of the gene makes it's a lethal trait, but it makes the animal completely different. It makes it look leucistic. Another example of a incomplete dominant trait in people, which is kind of funny, I didn't know that, and I have curly hair. So curly hair is technically an incomplete dominant trait. So I guess if you have 2 curly genes, you're a super curly. But lily whites are an example of that. Empty backs are an example of an incomplete dominant trait. You need to have 2 traits together to fully express it. But unlike recessive, one copy will noticeably look different from a normal average crested gecko. So that's what it's a little bit different. But they do need 2 copies to fully express. So again, we went through the basics, the 3 basics: dominant, recessive, and incomplete dominant. Now there is a ton more we could go through. We can go through explain phenotype, genotype. We can talk about there's so much more about genetics with crested geckos, and this is just the basic. So this is generally what you're going to see with most of your geckos. So dominant, recessive, incomplete dominant, and then you have polygenetics. So polygenetics just means poly, 2, genetics, multiple. It just means it's not a recessive trait, it's not really a dominant trait, and it's not an incomplete dominant trait. It's something that had to be kind of line bred and mixed with a lot of other traits to get that outcome that you wanted. So an example of that, I'm trying to think of an example. Oh, I know. Harlequins. Harlequins are a polygenetic trait. So the first harlequin started out more like flames. Then you got something that was more like a harlequin. Then you have something that's more like an extreme harlequin or an XX. So they are all within the same branch of morph. They all are pretty much the same thing, just more extreme. It's built upon each other. And it's multiple traits going together to make something like that. That's kind of what it is in a nutshell. And again, there is so much more that goes into this, but I hope this was helpful. I hope this was enjoyable to watch. This is just the basics. If you were interested in this and you enjoyed it, leave a comment and I can do a part 2 and we can go into more depth. But I thought this would be a good video for people that are interested in breeding crested geckos and just like genetics in general. And again, this is just the basics. This is like the dumbed down version, easy to understand with easy examples. Again, like and subscribe and tell me what you think.